Okay, good afternoon and welcome to our workshop, everyone. My name is Carmina Ramirez. I'm a part of Gabe's team. Today, I, along with my colleague Silvia Orellana, will be supporting with any questions and monitoring the chat throughout our session. Now, I am excited to introduce to you our Gabe board member, Carolina Serna.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for attending this session. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to our featured speakers. I am the Region 3 rep, which represents LA and Orange County on the CABE Board of Directors. We are grateful to Caslon Publishing for their generous sponsorship of this session, developing biliteracy for emerging bilingual learners, research-based approaches. And so I begin by introducing to you Dr. Kathy Escamilla. Her research centers on educational issues related to Spanish-speaking language minority students in U.S. schools. She has served as a bilingual teacher, school administrator, president of the National Association of Bilingual Ed, co-editor of the Bilingual Research Journal, and chairperson of the Bilingual Special Interest Group for AERA. She has also authored 3 books and over 50 research articles on topics related to biliteracy for Spanish-speaking children in the United States. Joining her is Dr. Jody Slavick. She is a research associate whose professional experiences include dual language coach, district ESL dual language resource teacher, middle school ESL and Spanish language arts teacher, elementary bilingual teacher, and adult ESL teacher. Her research interests include the design and implementation of bilingual dual language programs, strategies to promote biliteracy, and preparing teachers to work with emerging bilingual students. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kathy Escamilla and Dr. Jody Slavick. Thank you.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. This is quite a long day for you. I assume most of you have been working all day at your schools and you're doing this conference after hours. And so dinner is out of the question until a little bit later, and I'm sorry about that. And I applaud that you're willing to do this. And I hope that, we get some good conversation. Jody and I have planned, our colleague Sue Hopewell, I need to let you know, has a family emergency. Otherwise, she would have been happy to be here. So I'm going to be taking about half of the time, and Jody's going to be taking the rest of the time, not the rest of the time. And then we want to leave some time for questions. So please, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and we will do our best to save time to answer them. So Jody, could we move along? Okay, so Jody, do you want to speak to this, or I can speak to this? But I am so glad that Jody added this slide. We need to be honoring those we lost and those who are hurting in our Boulder community and beyond. As you know, the most recent, and unfortunately, probably not the last, mass shootings happened in our community in Boulder on Monday. And so maybe if you don't mind, we could just take a moment and honor those we have lost. Thank you very much. So Jody, who's here?
Who's here? And I was going to put a link in the chat, but it seems like I have failed to get the link for you. So I'm going to ask you to do something different. So avoid this first box here, but we'd love to know who's here in the room. It's kind of a strange void, Zoom void, when you're sitting here staring at a screen and it's hard to get a feel for who's there. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to open a separate browser on your computer or on your phone. So open a browser, and this is all going to be anonymous. So if you're shy about sharing, it's just going to be anonymous. So you can go ahead, open another browser and enter menti.com. And when you get to menti.com, it's going to ask you for a code. And we will put the code here in the in the chat. So there's the code. So you're going to go to menti.com and you're going to enter this code. And it's just going to ask you a few questions about who you are, what's your role, and the type of bilingual program you work in. And so if you'll just fill that out, you can also use the QR code here if you're a QR code kind of person. We'll just remind everyone as we're getting started here to keep yourselves on mute. Check your mute button there on the bottom. All right, so I'm going to be showing you the results of this Menti as we get into it, but let me just put into the chat one more time. Go to menti.com and enter code 29822164. So we're going to start off, as you're answering here, this is going to populate on my screen. I know you all have kids at home and are probably doing 5 million things all at the same time here. So, and it is slow, but it is populating. So let me just get it up here and we'll see how everyone is feeling. Of course, Kathy, it's extra slow today as we do it. Oh my gosh, look at that biggest word right there. We have a lot of tired people, which is understandable coming after a very long day. Tired physically, and I'm sure many of us are very tired emotionally as we've had a lot to deal with this week, this year. It's a lot, and classroom teachers are our unsung heroes during this pandemic, needing to teach in a variety of different ways to meet their students' needs. So I see tired is also surrounded by excited and happy, inspired, hopeful, exhausted. Oh my goodness. Please feel free to take care of your needs as we're presenting today as well. Okay, Kathy, I'm going to keep moving on the Menti so we can see who else is here as this keeps populating.
All right.
And if I can get it to advance. So this is our role. We have, let's see, about 200 participants here today. And those who have answered, we have about 100 of you have answered. And the majority, it looks like, of you are classroom teachers. So that's wonderful. We love teachers here. We have some coaches or TOSAs or coordinators, a few school administrators, some interventionists or support staff, and then a few university researchers, and then other. And if you're other, feel free to put in the chat what your role is as well, because we tried to get everyone, but we can't, we were limited on space here. All right, so moving on. We wanted to know what grade levels you work with. So it looks like we have an awful lot of pre-KK, first, second, lots of primary teachers, a few third grade, some fourth, fifth grade teachers. We have some secondary folks joining us. Welcome. I taught middle school for many years before going back to elementary, so I love my middle school teachers. Some higher ed, some work with practicing teachers, and then we have a lot of other as well. Okay, so I see in the chat, you guys are adding in that some of you teach multiple grade levels, working at the state prison, wonderful, high school, TK through 6, excellent. All right, so we have a smattering of people here, Kathy. Moving on from here, what we were curious about is the type of program you work in. It's hard to just, everyone uses different terminology. So we wanted you just to describe the type of program, the name that best describes your program. So we have English medium instruction with including ELD or ESL. Many of you work in English medium with ESL, ELD, and sheltered content. So I don't know what the percentage is, Kathy, but we have about 40 people working there. We have, less transitional than I would have maybe guessed. Lots of one-way dual language folks, two-way dual language folks, some language immersion. And then one person identifies with a maintenance heritage language. And you can see that these are coordinated with the grade levels. So we were wondering if we might see some patterns here. I think our middle and high schoolers, we saw a lot of green in here. So we have a lot of English medium in our secondary programs. One-way dual language, we have a lot of our primary. And nice to see so many two-way dual languages as well. All right. Is there anything you wanted to add, Kathy, on this slide?
Oh, that's exactly what I thought. We would have a variety of people, all pretty tired, doing a variety of things and working after hours. And so I apologize because my grandchildren are here this week and they just got in a fight, but I think I've settled the fight. So I totally get what you're all going through.
Okay, so I'm going to bring it back to our presentation.
Yep.
And allow to go from here.
Okay, so this is really nice because we are here today. We're going to talk about research-based approaches for teaching literacy and biliteracy in all kinds of programs. And now what I want to do is to just start with a look at the linguistic landscape in the United States. So if you will notice, about 73% of all of the kids who come to school speaking a language other than English, or as we call them, lotes, speak Spanish. So there's a lot of linguistic diversity in the United States. There are 300 different languages spoken somewhere in the United States, but we have a lot of one kind of group. We also have a very strong research base that supports how we teach literacy and biliteracy to this group, but we act like we don't. So we frequently hear from people things like, well, I don't know what to do. I don't speak Spanish, so I don't know what to do. I have 10 languages in my classroom. That's less common than we like to think, but we use that as an excuse sometimes to say we can't do biliteracy. So I wanted you to see, and it's not that we think you should ignore all the other languages. That's not it. But there is quite a bit of linguistic diversity, but around a common language. So Jody, let's see, let's move along here because I see our time is going to get away. Okay, so the most common language programs in the US that include emerging bilingual learners are programs that teach ELD only, or ELD plus literacy, or bilingual, some form of bilingual, and dual language. And we saw on the Mentimeter graph, some of all of those are represented here in the presentation, and we're glad about that. The first two, however, are English only programs. And people get mad when you use that term, but the fact is an English medium program where English is the only medium of instruction is an English only program. And the latter two utilize children's native languages as well as English as mediums of instruction. And we're going to argue that you could really use a child's native language in all four of these if you choose to. And in fact, that's what you need to do. So moving along. Okay, here's where we find ourselves. And here's the middle of what it is that I'm supposed to address today. We find ourselves in the middle of another debate about how to teach early reading. And this one is packaged in the form of something called the science of reading. And the science of reading is really a recycled program from 1971 when I started to teach, believe it or not. That you could say, oh my God, you're older than I thought. But in 1971, I started teaching in Johnstown, Colorado, and we used a program to teach English and English reading to kids who spoke Spanish. And the program was called the Miami Linguistics by Ralph Robinette. I invite you to look it up because in the program, you will see that we taught kids to read books like Matt Sat on a Fat Rat on a Mat. That was the kind of stuff we saw. Now, what did I just talk to a colleague in Boston about the other day? Him talking about his granddaughter saying, you know, she's learning to read Pat Has a Hat, and she's not all that excited about it. Well, this is the science of reading. It has been recycled over and over and over again. The important thing for us to remember about the science of reading, it is not developed for kids who are emerging bilingual learners, whether they are in English medium programs or whether they are in bilingual programs. These are monolingual ideologies. Let's move on, Jody. Okay, now, unfortunately, what people are being told is it doesn't matter whether your kids are emerging bilinguals or monolingual native English speakers, we can use the same methodology to teach them. And then in fact, they all need the methodology. This is the universal idea of everybody needs the same thing. Same is not equal. Same is not equal. Same is not equal. If we could unmute, don't do it, I would have you all repeat that. Okay, so let's go on. Literacy acquisition for emerging bilingual kids is both alike and different from teaching monolingual English-speaking children in English medium settings. How is it alike? All languages have directionality. For languages like Spanish and English, they share an alphabetic principle, and all literacy, no matter whether it's Mandarin or Arabic, is rule governed and symbolic. So all of these things make literacy somewhat universal, somewhat. Now, what are the differences? The differences, monolingual English kids are exposed to English exclusively. That's not necessarily a good thing, both in and out of school. English is their only language. They speak and are learning the language of status, power, and prestige, both in and out of school. They have only one linguistic resource to use in communication and in learning. I have this in bold. I love bold, but they can understand teacher instructional language. This is really important. And reading programs and assessments have been developed for them and their language, and validated and made reliable on them. Now, how is that different from an emerging bilingual child coming into our school who may find themselves and likely will find themselves in a monolingual English literacy environment? Emerging bilingual kids use and hear two languages, at times English at school and another language at home or in the community. They use both of their linguistic resources when producing and interacting with text, but English-only programs instruct and assess as if the kids are monolingual. I'm going to unpack each one of these things in just a minute, but I'm kind of giving you the setup. Emerging bilingual kids also use what we call translanguaging strategies, but these are frequently seen in our monolingual literacy programs as signs of confusion. They have to learn to understand teacher instructional language as well as how to decode words, and they interpret the world from both of their cultures. And they frequently experience cultural bias in reading materials. So they, when they read something like Carlos had to wear his brother's hand-me-downs, hand-me-downs are not a thing that's a cultural capital in the Mexican culture, because the clothes belong to everybody. They don't belong to just Carlos. They belong to all of the children in the family. Okay, so let's go on, Jody. Let me take apart each one of these things. So the use of two linguistic resources that we call translanguaging. So here you see a little child and he's saying, I'm eating sopa. And the teacher says, no, 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 look at the first word. And the child says, I'm eating sopa. Now, are you going to tell me that child isn't eating sopa, sopa de fideo? And the teacher says, no, spaghetti. Okay, so that's a child who's using two languages to make sense of the message. Last Sunday, we went to a carne asada. What else do you go to on Sundays? The right answer was a cookout. Now, frequently when kids do that, teachers might think that the kids are confused or they're using code switching because they have low proficiency in one or both of their languages. But in fact, they're using translanguaging strategies. Right, Jody, move along. We have to move along. So understanding teacher instruction is critical for emerging bilingual kids who are in monolingual classrooms. So this might be an example of a teacher sentence. Okay, my friends, let's clap the number of sounds we hear in the word sofa. How many are there? Okay, my friends, is the teacher's way of getting children's attention. Kids have to understand that. The teacher's not just saying, okay, my friends, do whatever the heck you want. It's a way of getting kids' attention. Clap means putting your hands together to make noise. Sounds are equal to phonemes, which is the concept of a sound. A word is the concept of a word like sofa, which is the smallest unit of meaning. And you have to know what a sofa is, we hope, to make meaning. And how many are there? How many sounds are there? Means, did we do the clapping correctly? Now, all of that you got to know. Quite different for an emerging bilingual kid in a monolingual English reading setting than for monolingual English-speaking kids who may have to be taught how to clap the sounds and what the sounds are, but know all of the rest of those things. Okay, Jody, how on we go. Okay, cultural appropriation. So how many of you remember that after Joe Biden's inauguration, these Bernie memes popped up all over? Well, my favorite, and I appropriated a few, were the Bernie on the abuelito, which you know is really abuelita's hot chocolate. But all of a sudden, Bernie becomes the abuelito with the hot chocolate. He took off one of his mittens. And of course, on a he now has his own loteria card. And you see him as numero 14, he's El Bernie. Okay, these are the kind of things kids use both of their cultures to make meaning of what they're reading. And let me say it again and again and again and again. It makes no sense for us to teach kids to decode. They don't understand what they're reading. So, okay, moving right along, because Jody's going to go into the good stuff. So here's what research we know, that bilingual kids do not equal monolingual kids. There are some important differences. Initiatives designed to improve reading instruction need to consider the research on emerging bilingual learners. And we know from August and Shanahan's work that word level literacy skills like decoding, word recognition, and spelling have always been attained in comparable levels by monolingual English kids and language minority students. However, comprehension and writing were identified as areas of struggle. Now, I'm giving August and Shanahan credit for this work, but I'll tell you, any one of a number of 4th and 5th grade teachers in this country could have told me that. My kids can decode till the cows come home. They don't understand what they're reading. So I worry about a reading initiative that would tell us that what all kids need, including emerging bilingual kids, are more opportunities to decode and fewer opportunities to understand and discuss what they're reading and learn to write. Okay, Jody, on we go. Okay, so what do emerging bilingual kids need? A comprehensive literacy program for emerging bilinguals includes English language development, the oral language skills needed to interact with text. That we call oracy in Literacy Squared. They need writing. They need meta-linguistic development, understanding how languages work within a language and across languages. They need to read for meaning, not just decoding. I'm always amazed at people who come and show me, look at our second language learners, how well they're doing decoding nonsense words. Hello, it's all nonsense when you don't understand the language. And I don't know that that's going to get you into college and being able to decode nonsense words. But anyway, we're often proud of that. Our emerging bilingual kids need to see themselves in the curriculum, and they need to have their first languages valued and used in the classroom, even if the classrooms are English medium. Phonics, I will remind you, has always meant to be a short-term program, not to be extended past the 3rd grade. Okay, now let's contrast that. I'm going to give you an example. If I have any friends from New Mexico on the call, I apologize, but this is being proposed as a structured literacy plan. Notice that the structured literacy, or the teaching of phonics or decoding, starts in infancy, and goes through the 12th grade. Doesn't stop at 3rd grade, and doesn't start at kindergarten. Now, if you go on, Jody, I know this is really small. I just wanted you to see the whole thing. So it also recommends that from K to 3, we have a 90-minute reading block. My question is, does this increase to 180 minutes in dual language or bilingual classes? I hope not. That means there's no time for math or science or social studies or all the other things that we need to do. The 90-minute block in this program, and I know the words were too small, that's why I put them on the next slide, is dedicated to providing instruction on 5 essential elements of beginning reading: phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Now, this is important. The note says additional instructional time, in addition to 90 minutes, will need to be scheduled to ensure adequate time to teach other areas of literacy, such as writing. Harken back to the research. Where do emerging bilingual kids need extra help? Writing and oracy. For grades K to 3, more than 90 minutes should be provided to students who have not met grade level reading goals. There is no oracy in the plan, and writing must be scheduled independently. These are two things that we know emerging bilingual kids need and is nowhere in the science of reading. Okay, so what do? We need to use Lote, or a language other than English, to teach English in English medium programs. If that's what you have to do, and I understand that's where most of our kids, that's why we're spending time talking about this. Most of our kids who are emerging bilingual kids are in English medium programs. They're not in bilingual programs. In addition to reading, they can't just be doing reading in 90-minute blocks. They need writing, oracy, and meta language. EBs are supported when we make strategic use of their native language. Instead of telling them never use Spanish, that can't be sopa, that's spaghetti. That can't be carne asada, that's a cookout, you idiot. Nobody says you idiot, but that's a cookout, right, honey? We need to provide materials, books. My goodness, I wish I had had the internet when I was a beginning teacher, because there are tons of materials available online in Spanish and other languages that mirror what kids are learning in English, and that can be great help at home. We should never censor a child's lote. We should never separate kids who are using their first languages to try to understand instruction. And we need to acknowledge that it's a part of a child's identity. And with that, a lot to think about for monolingual classrooms who have emerging bilingual learners, and that's most of the classrooms in our country. But we're going to switch now, and Jody's going to spend a few minutes talking about bilingual or dual language options.
Okay, thank you, Kathy, and feel free to jump in at any point. And I want to just reiterate, if you came in late, Dr. Hopewell had a family emergency today, so she was unable to be with us, and she's very sad about that, but I'm filling in for her. So as I get started talking about bilingual dual language options, what I'd love for you to do is grab a scratch piece of paper and a pencil, because I'm going to ask you to draw something in just a second. So as I'm going through these first slides, go ahead and grab that scratch piece of paper and a pencil. So I'm going to be sharing, if I can get back to this screen. Many of you are familiar with the work of Literacy Squared, and this is our book, that Biliteracy from the Start, Literacy Squared in Action, which is published by Caslon. And the book and the development of Literacy Squared began with these individuals that are on the screen, which I'm very privileged to know. They're amazing scholars. The work has continued through working with all of you in the field as you've implemented it in your classrooms and schools. And the work was originally created to meet the needs of simultaneous bilingual children who are growing up in the United States with both English and Spanish, and mostly in one-way programs. But the work has been taken up in many, many different contexts, and it is going to be helpful for every one of you here. So I'm going to go through it quickly. I apologize, we have such a short time. We do whole PDs on each section that I'm going to talk about today, but I've added an icon next to on several of the slides of the chapters in our book where you can go get more details and more information. So the value, we all know that the value of using children's native languages and their simultaneous bilingualism is in education, to educate them, whether in full-blown dual language programs or in some sort of bilingual education. It's settled science. I don't need to, I'm preaching to the choir here. You all know this. We know that offering quality bilingual options are the best for emerging bilingual students. And on the screen, you can just see a sampling of some of the studies and syntheses that have been published since 2004, which we steer our work towards. So my purpose isn't to convince anyone here of the benefits, but rather to share some thoughts about how we might approach it. So what the work of Literacy Squared has done is to conceptualize all the research, what we know that about what bilingual students need in order to be successful. And they put it into this framework of the holistic biliteracy framework. And this framework, I have to tell you, from the time I was a teacher and a coach using Literacy Squared, and then in my PhD, and then working with Literacy Squared these past years, this graphic is simple, this framework is simple, but there's so much research that has gone into each piece of this. So it's really powerful. It can be used as a type of compass to gear your work, and to no matter what what the beauty of a framework is that it's not a curriculum, it's not a program, it's not a strategy. It's something that you can all use in your different contexts to kind of keep yourself honest in a way of, am I really providing the best instruction for my emerging bilingual students? So as I explain the graphic, what I'm going to ask you to do is to get out that piece of paper, and I'm actually going to have you draw it with me as I explain it to help you conceptualize it. So what I'd like you to do is just to draw 2 circles, and you can see my mouse, what I'm pointing to. Just draw 1 circle and a circle next to it that are the same size. So you're going to draw 1 circle, and I want you to write Spanish on that circle. Draw another circle and write English on that circle. And then in each of the circles, I want you to divide into four pieces of pizza, right? So four pies here, 4 equal pieces. And what you're going to notice here is that there's icons in the middle. And these icons stand for different concepts. So the first one here are people, what it looks like people talking, okay? And you'll see it in both Spanish and in English. And this represents oracy, which Kathy mentioned just a minute ago, or the oral language students need to interact with literacy objectives. The second one represents, this little pencil here represents writing. The third, the book, reading. And then this little person here with the thought bubble represents meta language, which I'll explain, and I'll explain all of these and more in just a minute. But I want you to notice how the circles in both Spanish and English are the same size, and they also have the same elements within them. So what's really important is that we need all 4 of these components in both English and in Spanish. And I also want you to draw 1 arrow going from left to right, so connecting Spanish to English. These are our cross-language connections. And then draw another arrow from right to left. So we are making connections between Spanish and English, and from English back to Spanish. And then lastly, you're going to draw a little arrow in the middle here, which stands for connecting language environments. Okay, so as I explain each of these pieces, I want you to go ahead and add drawings or words, phrases, anything that's going to help you conceptualize it and solidify your understanding. So we're going to start with reading, because of course, everyone, when they think of reading, of literacy, they think reading, right? That's the first thing that comes to mind. And we're drawing on this work that Kathy mentioned by August and Shanahan, also by Slavin and Chung. We know for sure that teaching children to read in their first language promotes higher levels of achievement in English. So this little piece of the pie is our reading block. Now notice we have 4 pieces, right? 1 piece is 25%. So we would suggest that reading should take up about 25% of the time in Spanish literacy, 25% of the time in English literacy, not your 90 minutes that you just saw in the New Mexico plan there. And within reading, this is where you're doing your phonics and decoding. However, it's not the whole time, right? We would suggest that your phonics and decoding is about 25% of this reading block. And if I did my math right, and if I advance the slide here, that means it's about 6%. So 6% of your time in reading of that 25% is phonics and word work. So that is definitely not your 90 minutes. And we need to really check ourselves and make sure that, yes, we are teaching phonics and word work in Spanish and in English. However, it's not our entire literacy block. So moving on to this piece of the pie, which is writing. Again, 25% of the literacy block in writing. We just heard from Kathy that what do emerging bilinguals really need? Writing. They need to be able to see connections between reading and writing, and need ample opportunities to make those connections by actually writing, not just reading. And this is especially true for our students learning Spanish. For example, we know from our colleagues in Mexico and Emilia Ferrero in Argentina and others that due to the internal structure of Spanish, the shallow orthography, that there's a really strong relationship between the development of phonological awareness and writing. So when we're in classrooms in Mexico, we see kids, little kids, writing, doing so much writing. And through that writing, they're developing their phonemic awareness and learning how to read. So if we're really worried about our children being good decoders, we should make sure that they're having ample opportunities to write. We know that children can learn 2 languages at the same time, including reading and writing, without becoming confused and impeding progress in the other. So we want to make sure that we are offering opportunities in both languages to write. Now let's just look at this, this writing sample here of a bilingual child. We know that it's very common for bilingual children to apply their knowledge of Spanish phonetics to their writing in English. So that's why we in Literacy Squared emphasize the importance of looking holistically at what children can do in both languages, rather than just looking at what they can do in Spanish or what they can do in English. So if we would just look at this Spanish sample here, this is a first grader, and it says, mi animal favorito. Mi animal favorito es el oso panda y su color es negro con blanco. El oso come frutas y cañas. Sus ojitos son 2 círculos negros. Su pancita es gordita. Me gusta porque es un oso muy bonito. Okay, so those of you who teach first grade, you'd be like, yeah, you'd be really excited about this sample, right? It's very strong. You'd be very satisfied with their writing development. But let's look at this is the same child, first grader. Let's look at the English. And I'm going to ask you just for a second to look at it through the eyes of someone who maybe is uninformed about biliteracy and who hadn't read the Spanish sample. So it reads, my favorite toy. My favorite toy is a bunny and he dances. My mom gave it in Christmas. I love when he dances. I love him so much. He moves his ears when he dances. My bunny is white. So first of all, the content's great in this, right? It's really great. It's a lot of description. But what is your colleague most likely going to look at first, right? They're going to look, they immediately tend to go to spelling. They're going to be, oh my goodness, this child is getting confused. Their Spanish is making them confused, right? They might even be worried, like this child must have some sort of dyslexia or bilingual dyslexia. So what we want to point out is the fact that we know, and research shows that Spanish children apply their knowledge of Spanish phonetics to their English writing. So in Biliteracy Squared, or in Literacy Squared, what we have done to help teachers move away from just that phonics level is we've created a writing rubric that helps them to analyze the writing holistically in English and Spanish, and also to look at it from different levels. So from the discourse level, looking at structural elements, the word level, and phonics. So if I had looked at this sample holistically, I would look at the discourse level and looking at the way this child is using voice, which is really amazing, and the organization of their work, which is very strong as well in both of those samples. Then moving down to structural elements, I would look at syntax, looking at, maybe I would notice this, that my mom gave it in Christmas. So this is a point that I might want to start teaching explicitly, of how in English we would most likely say, my mom gave it to me for Christmas, okay? Moving down to the word level, we might look at the way this child's using pronouns. So knowing that in Spanish, you have masculine and feminine adjectives, but in English, we don't, right? We do, but we also have the it pronoun, right? That we typically use for inanimate objects and like animals or toys, right? So that's something we might want to point out. And then finally, the phonics level. We're going to look at some common approximations that all students make. Words like Christmas, the S and the C in dances, these patterns with the OVE, UVE, and the silent E. All students make those approximations, right? But we also, being bilingual educators and looking holistically, are going to notice the way that this child is applying their Spanish phonetics. So things like the B and V, the J in Espanol for the sound in English, I, when, him. I'm going through this quickly, I apologize, because we need to keep moving through. But all of you you've seen this in students' writing and know that these are things students need, they're doing. So now as bilingual educators, what we do is think about how to approach these in our instruction. How do we explicitly teach for these things? Do we just give them a whole list? Do we put them in an intervention where they get lists of words in isolation? No, that's not going to be the way that we do it. So one of the ways in Literacy Squared that we approach these approximations is through a strategy called the dictado. And this is a Literacy Squared adaptation of a very common strategy used in many Latin American countries. And what we do is we strategically plan so that we can help explicitly teach about these approximations. So in this example, we called it Our Wishes. We made a list of our favorite toys. Danny wanted a truck because he says it goes fast. However, Hannah wanted a transformer because she said it is the coolest toy ever. So I want you to just note in here, there's a lot that went into this. It's short, but it's doable for a first grader. But we have what's highlighted here is one of our teaching points is going to be the use of pronouns. So we have Danny and he. So people who identify as masculine and want to use those masculine pronouns, we would use he. Same with for the feminine, Hannah and she. And then we are going to show our kids how to use these, the it. So for their toys, truck goes with it, transformer, it. But we also we can also put in other things that we're seeing. So we have words that start with H to address the child using the jota, right? So however, Hannah, he. So we're going to point that out. We have some commonly misspelled words like favorite, because. We also have this transition here of however to help elevate the child's use of academic language, and a superlative adjective here with the coolest. Okay, so lots of really great stuff, but in context and so much more powerful than children just looking at lists of words. Okay, moving along here, oracy, we heard Kathy mention, is really important for our emerging bilingual students. That means teaching the oral skills that students need in order to be successful with the literacy objective. The research is very clear that emerging bilingual students need many opportunities to engage in oracy, and that's why it accounts for 25% of our literacy block in Spanish and 25% in English.
Hi, baby boy.
This is a place where you might want to ask yourself, are we doing enough oracy in Spanish? Are we doing enough oracy in English? Because we often don't see enough of it happening in our programs. So we have different components of oracy. We have vocabulary, we have language structures, and we have dialogue. So when we teach children, our teachers, to explicitly teach for oracy, we talk about these three main components, okay? And I'm going to show you what each of these means with an example rather than just giving you these definitions. So let's say we have a third grade class and they're reading the book El Cucuy, right? And what we like to do when we're sitting down planning with teachers is we ask them to imagine situations where their students would be required to talk and to listen. And we first encourage them to come up with really good dialogue questions that are going to get, we go into classrooms, we see a lot of teachers doing turn-in talks, but how can we get kids to do more turning it, talking to each other and listening to each other and adding more than just listen to the teacher ask a question and I answer, right? Okay, welcome everyone. We wanted to apologize for getting cut off in our last session with you all. We were listening for the bells and we didn't hear them and we just kept talking. So we wanted to make sure that you got the rest of the presentation to just finish our conversation about the best research for emerging bilinguals in our programs, in English medium programs and in bilingual programs. And I was talking to you about the holistic biliteracy framework, which is the Literacy Squared framework, which has done a beautiful job of collecting research on what the best instruction for emerging bilingual students in bilingual programs and put it together in this framework, which can help guide you in your instruction. And I had talked about the 4 quadrants here in both the Spanish literacy and literacy-based ELD spaces. We had talked about reading in both languages and talked about the importance of phonics, but as only one small part of our reading programs in both Spanish and English. We also had talked about writing and the importance of writing, especially for emerging bilingual students. And then we had talked about oracy and teaching the oral language skills that students need to be successful with their literacy objectives, reading and writing, and how each of these quadrants makes up 25% of the entire time that you're teaching in Spanish literacy and in English literacy. So that's where we had got cut off the last time we were together. And I just wanted to finish talking about the quadrants here on the holistic biliteracy framework with this last one, which is meta language. And what we know about meta language is that what is known and understood in one language contributes to what is known and understood about the other. And so we know that bilingual students are always accessing their entire linguistic repertoires, and that they need opportunities in order to examine and understand what is happening in each language, and to talk and understand about how those are similar in both languages and different. And this also includes teaching meta language within each language. So you see it highlighted in each quadrant. So talking about the way Spanish works, talking about the way English works, but also these opportunities with the arrows here to make cross-language connections, talking about what is similar and different between the two languages. And just to note that we like to plan for this strategically when we're planning paired literacy lessons. It happens strategically. It also happens informally throughout our lessons. We don't wait until the end of a unit in order to make these connections for students. We're carefully doing it within each paired literacy unit. So in summary, teaching meta language is helping students to think and talk about language, and also to develop children's meta-linguistic awareness about the relationships within and across languages. So if we were only doing meta-language in English for English speakers, an example that we might talk about is, well, what do we need at the end of the sentence and why? Talking about punctuation in that sense. However, meta-language in English for emerging bilinguals looks differently. We might talk about the similarities and differences. So in English, we use only one question mark at the end of a sentence, but in Spanish, we use two at the beginning and the end. Why? How does it look, etc. So we're really helping children to make those connections explicitly rather than just to have them discover them on their own. The final piece of this holistic biliteracy framework that I want to point out is this arrow in the middle, which is connecting language environments. And what we know is that when we sit down and plan with teachers, we really think about the ways to carefully plan these language environments so we can capitalize on the reciprocal and mutually reinforcing nature of how what one learns in one language environment has a direct effect on what is learned in the other. So the more connections we can make between what is happening in the language environments, the more we can really maximize children's opportunities to engage in oracy, reading and writing, and meta language in both of these languages. So hopefully that's a quick overview. As I mentioned earlier, you can get more information in the book that talks about each of these pieces of the holistic biliteracy framework in more depth. But it's a really nice way this framework can really help guide you and analyze your own programs to make instructional decisions that are based on research that is best for our bilingual students. So that is that, and now I'm going to turn it back over to Kathy.
Well, hello. And again, we're thankful for this opportunity to bring closure to our session. And we apologize for running long the first time, but we look forward to keeping in touch, hopefully, with the community. My job is to kind of summarize what we were trying to communicate. So first of all, if it didn't come across, we feel that bilingualism is an advantage. And we know that it's an advantage for an individual. Individual kids have better executive functioning in their brains if they're bilingual. For a community, we know how badly right now, especially during COVID, we have needed to communicate across many communities in many different languages, and we couldn't have done that without bilingual individuals. So thank goodness for them and for nations. And again, the ultimate goal here is not just to know 2 languages, but is to work toward, I think, greater harmony on the planet. So the value of that, of using children's home languages to educate them, is settled science. Bilingualism is an advantage. We also wanted to take on a topic that's a hot topic right now, but one that we think is rather contentious in our field, and that has to do with this new phenomena called the science of reading. So I will start by where we started in this presentation, that we are not opposed to phonics. We are opposed to phonics being the sole literacy program, especially for emerging bilingual kids. We would like to see phonics in its proper perspective in a robust and comprehensive literacy program, particularly for English language learners. And while we know that most of our English learners, or emerging bilingual kids, as we prefer to call them, are not in programs that utilize a native language as a medium of teaching literacy, we still feel that that language can help kids enter into literacy and learn more in school if their native languages are used as mediums of instruction or mediums of communication. We also wanted to make clear that in particularly our framework for Literacy Squared, we see English and Spanish being taught simultaneously as a part of good literacy instruction. But we do not advocate, and nor do we think it appropriate, that Spanish literacy be taught exactly the same way as English literacy. They are 2 different languages with two different internal systems and need to be respected as such. So we are not enemies of phonics, but we want to put in their proper perspective. And we would argue that a comprehensive biliteracy program for kids includes oracy and oral language development. It includes writing, and it includes metalinguistic development, whether you're in English medium or bilingual dual language programs. With that, we thank you very much for allowing us to share our information with you. And if you have questions or would like to contact us, our information is on the next slide. That's us, and you can contact us through our website, which is literacysquared.org. And we thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, everyone.